The day was unusually warm for early spring, and the air carried a faint scent of blooming flowers. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of her car, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder as she looked up at the imposing building in front of her. It wasn't just any hospital. It was a military hospital, a place where soldiers who had sacrificed so much came to heal. She took a deep breath, feeling both excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her. This wasn't going to be an ordinary visit. It was something bigger than she could fully grasp at that moment. As she walked toward the entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a soft, whirring sound. Inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit her nose, mingling with the faint hum of activity. Nurses moved briskly down the hallways, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Patients shuffled by, some leaning on crutches, others being pushed in wheelchairs. Every face told a story, some filled with quiet strength, others etched with pain or exhaustion. Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. These weren't just patients, they were heroes. Men and women who had risked everything for their country, only to return home carrying wounds that went far beyond what the eye could see. She had heard stories about this place before arriving, but nothing prepared her for the weight of actually stepping foot inside. Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag as she reminded herself why she was here, to make a difference no matter how small. A young receptionist greeted her warmly, guiding her through the initial formalities. "You'll meet Dr. Harris first," the woman explained cheerfully. "He's been expecting you." Karoline nodded, trying to steady her nerves. As she followed the receptionist down a long corridor lined with framed photographs of soldiers, she couldn't help but notice the expressions frozen in time: smiles, salutes, camaraderie. Each picture seemed to whisper its own tale of bravery and sacrifice. Dr. Harris turned out to be a kind man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a firm handshake. He wasted no time getting to the point. "We're grateful to have someone like you here," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Our patients need more than medical care. They need hope, connection, and purpose. And from what I've heard, you might be exactly what they need." Karoline listened intently as Dr. Harris gave her a brief overview of the hospital's challenges. Many of the soldiers struggled not just with physical injuries, but also with emotional scars. Some found it hard to adjust to civilian life after years of service. Others battled loneliness, depression, or anger. What they all shared, though, was a longing to feel seen and valued again. After their meeting, Dr. Harris offered to show her around. They visited various wards, each one revealing a new layer of the hospital's reality. In one room, a soldier sat alone, staring blankly at the wall. His wheelchair bore signs of wear, its wheels scuffed from countless turns down endless corridors. In another, two men laughed together while playing cards, their camaraderie cutting through the heaviness of the space. Karoline noticed how some patients lit up when spoken to, while others remained distant, lost in their thoughts. It was during this tour that she met him, a man sitting quietly by the window in a private room. He didn't turn when they entered, his gaze fixed on something outside. Dr. Harris introduced him briefly. "This is Ethan. He served in the Marines and lost his sight overseas." There was a pause. Then Dr. Harris added gently, "He keeps to himself most days." Ethan didn't acknowledge them right away, and Karoline hesitated, unsure if she should approach him. But something about his posture, the way he leaned slightly forward as if straining to hear the world around him, drew her closer. She cleared her throat softly and said, "Hi, Ethan. My name's Karoline. I'm here to spend some time with everyone and see how I can help." For a moment, there was silence. Then, without turning, Ethan replied in a low, gravelly voice. "Help? With what?" His tone wasn't hostile, just weary, like he'd already given up on expecting anything. Good to come his way. Karoline pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "Well, I don't know yet," she admitted honestly, "but I figured we could start by talking, maybe reading a book together or sharing stories. Whatever feels right to you." Ethan finally turned his head toward the sound of her voice, his unseeing eyes searching for hers. For a second, Karoline thought she saw a flicker of curiosity, Or maybe it was skepticism. Either way, he didn't send her away. Instead, he muttered almost under his breath, "Read me a book, huh? Been a while since anyone did that." That small opening was all Karoline needed. Over the next few days, she returned to Ethan's room, armed with books and patience. At first, he barely spoke, letting her read aloud while he stared off into the distance. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. He started asking questions about the characters, making comments about the plot. Once, when she stumbled over a difficult word, he chuckled softly and corrected her pronunciation. Through those readings, Karoline learned bits and pieces about Ethan's life before the accident. How he'd joined the Marines straight out of high school, driven by a desire to protect his family and country. How he'd dreamed of becoming a pilot until the explosion changed everything. And how now he felt like a burden, not just to his loved ones but to himself. Listening to him talk, Karoline realized that this wasn't just about physical healing. Ethan's spirit had been wounded too, and it would take more than medicine to mend it. Determined to help, she started thinking of ways to reignite his sense of purpose. Little did she know, this decision would set off a chain reaction that would touch not only Ethan but countless others in the hospital. Karoline knew she had to do more than just read books to Ethan. She wanted to help him rediscover his independence, to remind him that even though his sight was gone, his spirit and abilities were still very much alive. One afternoon, after finishing a chapter of their current book, she brought up an idea. "Ethan," she began cautiously, "have you ever thought about learning Braille? Or maybe trying some other skills that could help you navigate life without relying on your eyes?" There was a long pause before Ethan responded. His voice was guarded, almost defensive. "What's the point? I'm not going back to being a Marine. I can't drive, can't even walk down the street without someone holding my hand. What am I supposed to do with Braille?" Karoline didn't flinch at his tone. She understood his frustration. It wasn't directed at her, but at the situation he found himself in. Instead of pushing back, she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm yet firm. "I get it. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But listen, Ethan, this isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about finding new ways to live fully. Trust me, one step at a time is all it takes." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he muttered, "Fine. Let's try it. But don't expect miracles." That small agreement marked the beginning of something transformative. Over the next few weeks, Karoline worked closely with hospital staff to arrange adaptive training sessions for Ethan. They started with simple exercises, feeling raised dots on paper, practicing touch-based puzzles, and using a white cane to move around safely. At first, progress was slow, and there were moments when Ethan grew frustrated, snapping at anyone nearby. But Karoline stayed patient, encouraging him gently whenever he doubted himself. One day, during a particularly tough session, Ethan accidentally knocked over a stack of Braille cards. He froze, clearly embarrassed, and mumbled, "This is pointless, I'll never get it." Without hesitation, Karoline knelt beside him and began gathering the scattered cards. "You know what?" she said lightly. "Every expert was once a beginner. Even Olympic athletes tripped over their shoelaces the first time they ran. This is just part of the process." Her words must have struck a chord, because Ethan hesitated, then reached out to pick up a card. Slowly, he traced the bumps with his fingertips, repeating the letter aloud until he got it right. When he finally identified the entire sequence correctly, a flicker of pride lit up his face. For the first time in months, he smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Encouraged by Ethan's progress, Karoline decided to expand her efforts beyond individual cases. She noticed that many patients spent hours alone in their rooms, isolated not just by physical injuries but also by emotional barriers. Some were hesitant to interact with others, afraid of being judged or pitied. Others simply didn't know how to reconnect with the world after everything they'd been through. Determined to foster a sense of community, Karoline approached Dr. Harris with an idea. "What if we organized group activities?" she suggested. Art therapy, music nights, storytelling circles, things that bring people together and let them express themselves freely. Dr. Harris loved the concept and gave her full support. With his backing, Karoline launched a series of programs designed to engage the patients creatively and emotionally. The first event was an art therapy class held in a large common room filled with easels, paints, and brushes. To her surprise, nearly a dozen patients showed up, eager to give it a try. At first, there was awkwardness. Some participants fumbled, with the materials unsure where to start. Others sat silently, staring at blank canvases as if waiting for inspiration to strike. But Karoline moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. "There's no wrong way to create," she assured them. "Just let your hands follow your heart." Slowly, the room came alive. One man painted bold streaks of red and orange, explaining later that it represented the fire he'd survived. Another sketched delicate flowers, saying they reminded him of his mother's garden back home. By the end of the session, laughter echoed off the walls, and several pieces of artwork hung proudly on display. The success of the art therapy class inspired Karoline to organize more events. Music nights quickly became a favorite, with patients bringing instruments or simply clapping along to songs played on a portable speaker. Even those confined to bed joined in, tapping their fingers against the railings or humming softly under their breath. These gatherings weren't just entertainment, they were lifelines pulling people out of isolation and reminding them that they weren't alone. Of all the initiatives, however, the storytelling circles resonated most deeply. Every Friday evening, a group of patients gathered in the common room, forming a loose circle of chairs. Karoline facilitated these sessions, inviting everyone to share a story from their past, a happy memory, a funny incident, or even a lesson learned the hard way. The rules were simple: no interruptions, no judgment, and plenty of applause afterward. During the first session, a young woman named Maria stood hesitantly, clutching a notebook in trembling hands. Her face bore scars from severe burns sustained during a mission, and she rarely spoke to anyone outside medical appointments. When she began talking, her voice wavered, but the room fell silent, hanging on to every word. "I remember waking up in the hospital," Maria said, pausing to steady herself. "The pain was unbearable, and I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror. All I kept thinking was, who am I now? But then I realized something. My scars don't define me. What defines me is how I choose to keep living." By the time she finished speaking, tears glistened in the eyes of listeners, not out of pity but admiration. Karoline watched silently, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of the moment. These stories weren't just words. They were acts of courage, bridges connecting broken souls. As the weeks went on, the storytelling circles grew in popularity. Veterans who initially resisted joining eventually found themselves drawn in by the camaraderie and shared vulnerability. Each session ended with applause, hugs, and promises to return the following week. For many, these evenings became the highlight of their stay at the hospital. Through it all, Karoline remained a constant presence, listening, cheering, and reminding everyone that their voices mattered. She saw firsthand how storytelling healed, wounds that medicine couldn't touch. And as she looked around the room each Friday night, watching smiles break through pain and laughter chase away despair, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Word of Karoline's efforts spread quickly through the hospital, like ripples in a pond. Patients who had once kept to themselves began seeking her out, asking when the next storytelling circle or art therapy session would take place. Even some of the quieter ones, those who rarely spoke to anyone, started showing up with hopeful expressions on their faces. It wasn't just about passing time anymore. It was about finding meaning in the midst of chaos. One evening during a particularly lively music night, an older man shuffled into the room using a walker. His movements were slow and deliberate, but there was determination in his eyes. Karoline recognized him immediately. He was one of the veterans who had been at the hospital for years, long after his physical injuries had healed. He rarely left his room, and when he did, it was usually to sit alone in the courtyard. No one knew much about him except that he preferred solitude. Karoline approached him cautiously, unsure if he'd welcome her presence. "Hi," she said, softly, smiling warmly. "Would you like to join us? We're just starting." The man hesitated, glancing around the room where patients were clapping along to a cheerful tune. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "Sure," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Why not?" She helped him settle into a chair near the front, making sure he was comfortable before returning to lead the group. As the music played, something remarkable happened. The man who had seemed so distant and reserved began tapping his foot in rhythm. When someone handed him a tambourine, he accepted it without hesitation and joined in, shaking it gently at first, then with growing enthusiasm. By the end of the song, he was laughing, a deep, hearty laugh that filled the room with warmth. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Karoline sat beside him. "You've got great timing," she teased lightly. "Ever thought about joining us?" "More often?" He chuckled, looking down at the tambourine in his hands. "Been a while since I felt this alive," he admitted, his voice softer now. "Maybe I will come back. Thanks for letting me tag along." Moments like these reminded Karoline why she had come here in the first place. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It was about creating spaces where people could feel human again, where they could laugh, cry, and simply exist without judgment. These small victories, though seemingly insignificant, added up to something profound, a sense of belonging. As weeks turned into months, Karoline noticed subtle changes in the hospital's atmosphere. Conversations flowed more freely in the hallways, and laughter echoed through the corridors more often than silence. Patients encouraged each other during therapy sessions, sharing tips and cheering on progress no matter how minor. Even the staff seemed lighter, their interactions infused with a renewed sense of purpose. But perhaps the most striking change was in Ethan. The once withdrawn Marine had become a regular participant in almost every activity Karoline organized. Not only had he mastered basic Braille, but he'd also taken up adaptive sports, excelling at goalball, a team sport designed for visually impaired players. One afternoon, after scoring the winning point in a friendly match, Ethan stood beaming, as his teammates hoisted him onto their shoulders in celebration. Later that day, he pulled Karoline aside. "I owe you a lot," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just teach me how to read Braille or throw a ball. You reminded me that I'm still capable of doing things, not just surviving, but living." Karoline blinked back, tears shaking her head. "Ethan, you did all the hard work. I just gave you a push. The rest was all you." He smiled, squeezing her hand briefly before heading off to rejoin his friends. Watching him go, Karoline felt a swell of pride and gratitude. Helping Ethan rediscover his strength had taught her something too. Resilience wasn't about bouncing back to who you were before. It was about embracing who you are now. Karoline's impact didn't go unnoticed by higher-ups either. One morning, she received a message asking her to attend a special ceremony hosted by the hospital administration. Curious but unsure what to expect, she arrived at the designated room to find it packed with patients, staff, and even a few military officials. A podium stood at the front, draped with an American flag, and rows of chairs were filled with eager faces. When her name was called, Karoline stepped forward, heart pounding. She hadn't expected this kind of recognition. Her focus had always been on the soldiers, not herself. But as she accepted a certificate of appreciation and listened to heartfelt speeches praising her dedication, she realized that her work represented something larger. It symbolized hope, connection, and the power of community. After the ceremony, patients lined up to thank her personally. Some hugged her tightly, others shook her hand, and a few simply nodded, their gratitude shining through unspoken words. One veteran handed her a folded piece of paper, whispering, "This is for you." Later, when she unfolded it, she found a poem written in shaky handwriting. "Through darkened halls and weary hearts, you brought light where shadows start. Not medals or glory, but kindness untold changed lives forever, made broken whole." Tears blurred her vision as she read the lines over and over. This wasn't just feedback, it was validation that her efforts mattered. that the late nights planning activities, the endless conversations, and the moments of doubt had all been worth it. Though the ceremony marked a milestone, Karoline knew her journey wasn't over. There was still so much more to do, for the patients, for the hospital, and for herself. She continued organizing events, introducing new ideas like gardening workshops and writing groups. Each initiative brought fresh opportunities for connection and growth, further strengthening the bonds within the hospital community. And yet, amidst all the busyness, Karoline never lost sight of the individuals. Whether it was sitting quietly, with someone struggling to open up, or celebrating another's milestone, she remained fully present. Her approach was simple: listen, care, and believe in the potential of every person she met. By the time she prepared to leave the hospital, a decision prompted by personal commitments rather than a desire to step away, the place felt different. It wasn't perfect, of course. Pain and challenges still lingered. But there was a newfound energy, a spirit of resilience that hadn't existed before, and Karoline knew she'd played a part in nurturing that spark. On her final day, patients gathered in the common room to say goodbye. Speeches were made, gifts exchanged, and promises to stay in touch reiterated. As Karoline looked around the room, taking in the sea of familiar faces, she felt a lump rise in her throat. Leaving wasn't easy, but she took comfort in knowing that her legacy would live on, not in awards or certificates, but in the smiles, laughter, and stories shared among those she'd touched. Because sometimes the greatest impact isn't measured in grand achievements, it's found in the quiet moments that remind us we're not alone. And for Karoline Leavitt, that was enough. Karoline's final days at the hospital were bittersweet. Though she had accomplished so much, leaving felt like saying goodbye to a second home. The soldiers, nurses, and staff had become more than acquaintances. They were family now. Every corner of the hospital held memories. The laughter-filled music nights, the quiet moments reading with Ethan by the window, the storytelling circles where tears flowed freely, but always led to healing. On her last morning, Karoline walked through the halls one last time, soaking in the familiar sights and sounds. She stopped briefly outside the art therapy room, peeking inside to see patients working on their latest projects. One man was painting a vibrant sunset, while another carefully sketched the outline of a bird mid-flight. These creations weren't just art. They were symbols of hope, resilience, and the human spirit refusing to be broken. As she continued down the corridor, she noticed Maria sitting alone in the courtyard. Her journal rested open on her lap, pen poised as if she'd been writing something important. Karoline hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Mind if I join you?" she asked gently. Maria looked up and smiled, patting the bench beside her. "Of course not. Actually, I wanted to show you something." She handed over the journal, flipping it open to a page filled with handwritten lines. It was a poem titled, "Wings of Courage." Karoline read it silently, her chest tightening as she absorbed each word. The verses spoke of rising above pain, finding beauty in scars, and learning to fly again despite life's storms. When she finished, she looked at Maria, blinking back tears. "This is incredible," she said, her voice trembling. "You've got real talent." Maria shrugged modestly, though her cheeks flushed with pride. "I never thought I could write anything worth reading, but you kept telling me to share my story, so I did. And honestly, it feels good, like maybe my experiences can help someone else too." That moment encapsulated everything Karoline had hoped to achieve. It wasn't just about helping individuals heal, it was about empowering them to inspire others. Maria's words would undoubtedly resonate with anyone who read them, offering comfort and courage to those navigating their own struggles. Later that afternoon, the hospital hosted a farewell gathering for Karoline. The common room buzzed, with energy as patients and staff gathered to celebrate her contributions. Balloons decorated the space, and a banner hung across the wall that read, "Thank you for everything," in bold letters. Someone had even baked a cake, its frosting adorned with tiny painted flowers, a nod to the gardening workshops Karoline had introduced. When it was time for speeches, Ethan volunteered to go first. Standing tall with his cane in hand, he cleared his throat and began speaking. When I first met Karoline, I didn't think much of her. Just another person trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, right? But she didn't try to fix me. Instead, she showed me how to find strength in myself again. She taught me Braille, pushed me to play goalball, and most importantly, reminded me that I'm still a fighter. His voice cracked slightly and he paused to compose himself. So, thank you, Karoline, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for showing all of us that we're more than our injuries. You've changed this place, and us, forever. Applause erupted, filling the room with warmth. Other patients chimed in, sharing their own stories of how Karoline had impacted their lives. An older veteran recounted how her encouragement had inspired him to reconnect with his grandchildren after years of withdrawal. A young woman described how the storytelling circles helped her process trauma she hadn't been able to put into words before. Each story added another layer to the tapestry of gratitude surrounding Karoline. When it was finally her turn to speak, Karoline stood quietly for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. I came here hoping to make a difference, she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. But what I didn't expect was how much all of you would change me. Seeing your courage, your determination, your willingness to keep going despite everything, you've reminded me what it means to truly live. She paused, scanning the room and meeting the eyes of those who had become so dear to her. This isn't goodbye, she continued firmly. It's just, see you later. I'll carry this place and all of you with me wherever I go, and I promise I'll keep advocating for veterans and spreading awareness about the incredible work being done here. Her words earned another round of applause, followed by hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt farewells. As the party wound down, Karoline lingered, reluctant to leave. But eventually, reality set in, and she knew it was time to say her final goodbyes. Driving away from the hospital, Karoline felt a mix of sadness and fulfillment. She glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the building grow smaller in the distance. Though physically leaving, a piece of her heart remained behind, entwined with the stories, struggles, and triumphs of the people she'd grown to love. Back home, she found herself reflecting on the experience often. Conversations with Ethan played in her mind, along with the poems shared during storytelling circles and the laughter echoing through music nights. These memories fueled her desire to continue making a difference. She began volunteering with organizations dedicated to supporting veterans, organizing fundraisers, and speaking at events to raise awareness about mental health challenges faced by service members. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Karoline stumbled upon a post from the hospital. It featured photos from recent activities, a group of patients playing goalball, a new mural painted during an art therapy session, and a snapshot of Maria holding her journal proudly. Beneath the images was a caption. Thanks to Karoline Leavitt, our community continues to thrive. Her legacy lives on in every smile, every story, and every step forward. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the screen. This wasn't just recognition. It was proof that her efforts had created lasting change. The hospital wasn't just surviving. It was flourishing. Patients were thriving because they had learned to lean on each other, to celebrate victories, big and small, and to embrace life with renewed purpose. Months passed and Karoline stayed connected with the hospital, visiting whenever possible. During these trips, she marveled at how the programs she'd started had evolved. New initiatives had been added, including a mentorship program pairing newly injured soldiers with veterans further along in their recovery journeys. The sense of camaraderie she'd fostered had blossomed into something even stronger, a network of support that extended far beyond the hospital walls. Through it all, Karoline realized something profound. True healing wasn't confined to a single location or moment in time. It was ongoing, shaped by connections, shared experiences, and the belief that everyone deserved a chance to rebuild their lives. Her time at the military hospital had taught her that heroism wasn't always loud or celebrated. It often lay in quiet acts of kindness, patience, and unwavering faith in humanity. As she drove home after one such visit, the sun setting in hues of orange and pink, Karoline smiled to herself. She had set out to bring light to a dark place, but in doing so, she had discovered her own purpose. Helping others heal had healed parts of her she hadn't known needed mending, and though her journey was far from over, she knew one thing for certain. She would spend the rest of her life honoring the brave souls who had touched her heart, ensuring their sacrifices were never forgotten. Karoline's connection to the military hospital didn't end when she stepped out of its doors for the last time. In fact, it grew stronger with each passing week. She began receiving letters and messages from patients she'd worked with, updates on their progress, snippets of their lives, and heartfelt words of gratitude. Some sent drawings they'd made during art therapy sessions, while others shared poems or stories written in the quiet hours of the night. Each message was a reminder that her impact hadn't faded. It had taken root, growing into something enduring. One letter, in particular, stood out. It came from Ethan. His handwriting was careful and precise, evidence of his growing confidence with Braille. He wrote about his recent achievements, winning second place in a regional goalball tournament, learning to cook simple meals independently, and even mentoring a newly blinded soldier who had just arrived at the hospital. "I never thought I'd be able to help someone else," he admitted in the letter. "But thanks to you showing me that I still have value, I'm doing exactly that. You changed my life, Karoline. And now, maybe I can change someone else's." Reading. Those words, Karoline felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for Ethan. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving, finding purpose in helping others navigate the same challenges he once faced. That ripple effect, the way one act of kindness could inspire another, was what kept her motivated to keep going. Back in her own community, Karoline became a vocal advocate for veterans' issues. She started attending town hall meetings, speaking passionately about the importance of mental health resources and adaptive programs for wounded soldiers. Her speeches were raw and honest, drawing from personal experiences at the hospital. She spoke about the loneliness many veterans felt after returning home, the invisible scars that lingered long after physical wounds healed, and the transformative power of connection and support. Her words resonated deeply with listeners. People approached her after events, sharing their own stories or asking how they could contribute. Inspired by this response, Karoline launched a local initiative called Hearts for Heroes, aimed at bridging the gap between civilians and veterans. The program organized volunteer opportunities, fundraising drives, and awareness campaigns to ensure veterans received not only medical care but also emotional and social support. One of the first projects under Hearts for Heroes was creating care packages for hospitalized soldiers. Volunteers gathered items like journals, art supplies, and audiobooks, things that could bring comfort and joy during recovery. They also included handwritten notes of encouragement, reminding recipients that they weren't alone. When the first batch of packages arrived at the military hospital, Karoline couldn't help but smile as she imagined the smiles they would bring. Despite her busy schedule, Karoline made it a point to visit the hospital regularly. These visits weren't official or planned. They were spontaneous, driven by her desire to stay connected. On one such trip, she found the courtyard buzzing with activity. Patients were gathered around a large wooden frame, hammering nails and stretching strings to create a communal garden trellis. It was part of a new gardening program inspired by her earlier workshops. A young man noticed her standing nearby and waved her over. "Hey, Karoline, come see what we're building," he called out, grinning broadly. As she approached, he explained that the trellis would support climbing plants like beans and morning glares, chosen specifically because they grew quickly and symbolized resilience. "We figured if those little seeds can push through dirt and reach for the sky, so can we," he said, his voice filled with determination. Karoline nodded, touched by the symbolism. "That's beautiful," she replied. "And look at all of you working together. This is exactly what I hoped for, a community supporting each other. As she wandered through the courtyard, she saw familiar faces alongside new ones. Some patients introduced her to family members visiting for the day, proudly showing off their latest accomplishments. Others pulled her aside to share updates on their lives since her departure. One veteran handed her a small potted plant, saying, "This is for you, something to remember us by, and to remind you that growth happens everywhere, even in unexpected places." Holding the plant close, Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. These people weren't just patients, they were teachers, showing her the strength of the human spirit time and again. Their resilience inspired her to keep pushing forward, to find new ways to make a difference. Meanwhile, back in her hometown, Karoline's efforts gained traction. Local businesses donated funds and resources to Hearts for Heroes, enabling the organization to expand its reach. Schools joined in, organizing art contests and essay competitions centered on themes of courage and gratitude. Winning entries were compiled into a book titled Voices of Valor, which was distributed to hospitals, libraries, and veteran centers nationwide. The project brought communities together in unexpected ways. Students visited nursing homes to read excerpts from the book to elderly veterans, sparking conversations across generations. Families hosted dinner parties where neighbors shared stories of loved ones who had served, fostering a deeper understanding of sacrifice and service. Even strangers struck up conversations at coffee shops or grocery stores, united by their shared appreciation for those who had given so much. Karoline marveled at how far her initial idea had spread. What began as a single step inside a military hospital had grown into a movement touching countless lives. Yet she remained humble, always redirecting praise toward the real heroes, the soldiers whose courage lit the path for everyone else. One evening, as Karoline sat on her porch sipping tea, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day at the hospital. Back then, she had been unsure of what to expect, nervous about whether she could truly make a difference. Now, looking back, she realized that the biggest changes hadn't been in the hospital or the programs. It had been within herself. She had walked into that building hoping to offer comfort, but she had emerged transformed. Through every conversation, every shared laugh or tear, she had learned invaluable lessons about resilience, empathy, and the power of human connection. The soldiers had taught her that healing wasn't linear. It was messy, unpredictable, and often painful, but it was always possible. And sometimes all it took was someone willing to listen, to believe, and to say, "You matter." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Karoline smiled softly. Her journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. There were still stories to hear, hearts to mend, and bridges to build. But no matter where life took her next, one thing was certain. She would carry the lessons of the hospital with her forever, letting them guide her steps and shape her purpose. Because in the end, it wasn't about grand gestures or titles. It was about being present, showing up for others, and reminding them that they weren't alone. And for Karoline Leavitt, that was enough. As the months rolled by, Karoline's life became a delicate balance between her advocacy work and her personal commitments. Yet, no matter how busy she got, she always carved out time for the people who mattered most, the soldiers at the military hospital. Her visits were never planned around schedules or obligations. They were driven by genuine care and curiosity about how everyone was doing. Each trip back felt like reuniting with family after a long absence. On one such visit, she found the hospital buzzing with excitement. A group of patients had organized a talent show, showcasing skills they'd honed during their recovery. Some performed musical pieces on guitars or pianos, while others recited poetry or displayed artwork created in therapy sessions. One man even juggled tennis balls with surprising dexterity, earning roars of laughter and applause from the audience. Karoline sat in the back, smiling as she watched the performances unfold. When Ethan took the stage, his cane tucked neatly beside him, she leaned forward, eager to see what he'd prepared. To her surprise, he didn't perform anything physical. Instead, he stood confidently, holding a small notebook in his hands. "I've been working on something," he began, his voice steady despite the crowd's attention. "It's a story, a short one, about finding light in the dark." He proceeded to read aloud a tale he'd written, inspired by his own journey. The narrative followed a soldier blinded in battle who initially believed his life was over. But, through perseverance, friendship, and self-discovery, he learned to navigate his new reality and find joy again. The room fell silent as Ethan spoke, his words painting vivid images that resonated deeply with everyone present. When he finished, there was a moment of stillness before the entire audience erupted into applause. Afterward, Ethan sought Karoline out. "Did you like it?" he asked, a hint of nervousness in his tone. She hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, that was incredible. You should share this with more people. It could inspire so many others." He nodded thoughtfully, already considering submitting it to a veterans magazine. While Karoline continued supporting the hospital community, she also expanded her efforts beyond its walls. Through Hearts for Heroes, she collaborated with schools, businesses, and local organizations to create opportunities for civilians to connect with veterans. One initiative involved pairing students with veterans for storytelling projects, where young participants interviewed service members about their experiences. These interviews were recorded and compiled into podcasts, giving a platform to voices that often went unheard. The project quickly gained popularity, with classrooms across the country adopting it as part of their curriculum. Students were fascinated by the stories they heard, tales of bravery, sacrifice, and resilience. For many, it was their first real glimpse into the lives of those who served. Veterans, too, found the experience rewarding, appreciating the chance to share their memories with an attentive audience. One student wrote to Karoline afterward saying, "Before this project, I didn't really understand what it meant to serve our country. Now I feel like I know these heroes personally. Their courage inspires me to be better every day." Reading the letter, Karoline felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Bridging the gap between generations was exactly what she'd hoped to achieve. Despite her successes, Karoline faced challenges along the way. There were days when the weight of everything felt overwhelming, when emails piled up unanswered, meetings ran late, and exhaustion threatened to pull her under. On those days, she reminded herself why she started this journey in the first place. She thought about Ethan reading his story to a captivated audience, Maria writing poems that gave voice to her pain, and the countless other moments of triumph she'd witnessed. She also leaned on her support system, the friends, colleagues, and mentors who cheered her on when doubt crept in. They reminded her that making a difference wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. "You're planting seeds," one friend told her during a particularly tough week. "Not all of them will sprout right away, but that doesn't mean your work isn't valuable. Give it time." Those words stuck with her, grounding her whenever she felt discouraged. She realized that change didn't happen overnight. It grew gradually, nurtured by consistent effort and unwavering belief in its possibility. Amidst her advocacy work, Karoline made time to reflect on her own growth. Helping others heal had taught her invaluable lessons about empathy, patience, and the importance of listening without judgment. She had walked into the hospital hoping to offer comfort, but in return she had received far more than she ever expected. Perspective, purpose, and a renewed appreciation for life's fragility and beauty. One evening, while sorting through old notes and photos from her time at the hospital, she stumbled upon a journal entry she'd written shortly after arriving. In it, she had expressed doubts about whether she belonged there, questioning if she could truly make an impact. Reading those words now brought a bittersweet smile to her face. How much had changed since then, not just in the hospital, but within herself. She flipped through the pages, reliving key moments. The first time Ethan smiled during a reading session, the laughter echoing through music nights, the quiet strength of veterans sharing their stories. Each memory reinforced her belief that healing was possible, even in the darkest times. It reminded her that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness, reading a book, listening to someone's pain, or simply being present, could spark profound transformations. As her reputation grew, Karoline began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events nationwide. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to step into the spotlight, but eventually, she agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to amplify the voices of those she cared about most. Her speeches were heartfelt and authentic, drawing from her experiences at the hospital and the lessons she'd learned along the way at ER. One event, she shared a story about a veteran who had once told her, "We don't need pity, we need understanding." Those words had stayed with her, shaping her approach to advocacy. "Our job isn't to fix anyone," she told the audience. "It's to stand beside them, to remind them that they're not alone, and to celebrate their victories no matter how small, because every step forward is worth cheering for." Her message resonated deeply, earning standing ovations and sparking conversations long after the events ended. People approached her afterward, asking how they could get involved, or thanking her for opening their eyes to the struggles faced by veterans. Many pledged to volunteer, donate, or simply start conversations with the service members in their own communities. Through it all, Karoline remained grounded, never losing sight of the individuals behind the larger mission. Whether speaking to a packed auditorium or sitting quietly with a single patient, her focus stayed on connection. She knew that true change happened not in grand gestures but in the everyday moments, the smiles, the shared laughter, the quiet reassurances that someone cared. And so, as she looked ahead to the future, Karoline felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey hadn't followed a straight path and there were still miles to go. But she embraced the uncertainty, knowing that every step she took brought her closer to creating a world where no one had to face their struggles alone. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not titles or accolades, but the knowledge that she had made a difference. And for Karoline Leavitt, that was enough. As the years passed, Karoline's efforts continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what she could have imagined. The programs she had started at the military hospital had evolved into something greater, spreading to other hospitals and communities across the country. Veteran stories were being shared not just locally but nationally, through podcasts, books, and even documentaries inspired by her work. Each new project carried a piece of her vision, a belief in the power of connection, creativity, and resilience. One day, while attending a conference on veteran advocacy, Karoline was approached by a filmmaker who wanted to document her journey. At first, she hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of being the center of attention. "It's not about me," she insisted. "It's about the soldiers, their courage, their sacrifices, their stories." The filmmaker nodded, understanding her perspective. "Exactly," he replied. "That's why we want to tell this story. Your work has created a platform for them to share their voices. This isn't just your story, it's theirs too." Reluctantly, Karoline agreed, under one condition: the focus would remain on the veterans and their experiences. Over the next several months, cameras followed her as she visited hospitals, spoke at events, and interacted with patients. The resulting film wasn't flashy or overly polished. It was raw, honest, and deeply human. It captured quiet moments of healing, laughter-filled gatherings, and tearful confessions that revealed the strength behind vulnerability. When the documentary premiered, it struck a chord with audiences worldwide. Viewers were moved not only by the soldiers' stories but also by Karoline's unwavering dedication to helping them heal. Social media lit up with messages of gratitude, many from people inspired to take action in their own communities. One viewer wrote, "This reminded me that everyone has a role to play in supporting those who serve. I'm signing up to volunteer tomorrow." Another said simply, "Thank you for showing us what true kindness looks like." Despite the growing recognition, Karoline never lost sight of the reason she started this journey. She continued visiting the military hospital, always eager to catch up with familiar faces and meet new ones. On one visit, she found Ethan leading a Braille workshop for recently blinded veterans. Watching him guide others with patience and encouragement filled her with pride. He had come so far, from a man who once doubted his worth to someone empowering others to believe in themselves. After the session, Ethan pulled her aside. "You know, teaching these guys reminds me of when you first sat down with me," he said, smiling. "I hope I'm making you proud." Karoline placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes glistening. "Ethan, you've made me proud every single day since I met you. You didn't just rebuild your life, you're helping others do the same. That's what real heroism looks like." Moments like these reinforced her belief that healing was contagious. When one person found strength, it inspired others to seek it too. The hospital had become a living testament to that truth, a place where broken spirits were mended, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of care and compassion. Back home, Karoline poured her energy into expanding Hearts for Heroes, ensuring its impact reached even more people. The organization launched new initiatives, including peer support groups for families of wounded veterans and scholarships for children pursuing careers in fields related to veteran care. Local chapters sprang up in cities nationwide, each tailored to address the unique needs of its community. One particularly impactful program paired veterans with civilian mentors, people willing to listen, offer guidance, and provide companionship during challenging times. These relationships often blossomed into lifelong friendships, bridging gaps between worlds that might otherwise never intersect. One veteran summed it up perfectly. "Having someone who understands my struggles and doesn't judge me for them has been a game changer. It's like finally finding a safe harbor after years of drifting." Though her days were busy, Karoline made sure to carve out time for herself. She took long walks in nature, journaling reflections on her journey and jotting down ideas for future projects. Sometimes she'd sit quietly, letting memories wash over her. The laughter during music nights, the tears shed during storytelling circles, the quiet determination etched on countless faces. These moments grounded her, reminding her why she kept pushing forward despite challenges. She also stayed connected with Maria, whose poetry had touched so many hearts. Maria had begun performing her work at public readings, sharing her journey with audiences large and small. Her words resonated deeply, offering comfort to anyone struggling with trauma or loss. After one such performance, a woman approached, her tears streaming down her face. "Your poem gave me hope," she whispered. "I thought I was alone, but hearing your story made me realize I'm not." Maria later told Karoline about the encounter, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never imagined my pain could help someone else," she admitted, "but now I see how powerful it is to share our truths. Thank you for encouraging me to speak up." As time went on, Karoline realized that her work wasn't just about helping others. It was also about learning from them. Every soldier, every veteran, every family member had taught her something invaluable: the importance of resilience, the beauty of vulnerability, and the transformative power of connection. They had shown her that healing wasn't linear. It was messy, unpredictable, and often painful. But it was always possible. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Karoline reflected on how much had changed since that first day at the hospital. Back then, she had walked in hoping to bring light to a dark place. Now, looking back, she saw that the light had been there all along, in the courage of the soldiers, the kindness of strangers, and the shared humanity that bound them together. Her journey hadn't followed a straight path, and there were still miles to go. But she embraced the uncertainty, knowing that every step she took brought her closer to creating a world where no one had to face their struggles alone. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not titles or accolades, but the knowledge that she had made a difference. And for Karoline Leavitt, that was enough.